So it is clear that Jews were Hellenized and would have been educated in various schools of philosophy. Now, what about the Stoics? Oh, what about the Stoics? So Stoicism was founded by a gentleman by the name of Zeno of Citium or Chittim, right? He was born in Chittim, which is Cyprus, in 334 BCE. Most scholars say that he was a Phoenician. Again, we already determined that the term Phoenician does not mean non-Israelites. Again, Phoenician does not mean non-Israelites, because Greeks would call people from the Levant and from that area, they would call them Phoenicians. Why? Because of the trade that was going on, right? He moved to Athens. He began teaching around 300 BCE. He died in Athens in 262 BCE, right? This is from New World Encyclopedia, right? This is linked at the end of the sources as well, right? Zeno of Citium, the Stoic, right, is known as the founder of the Stoic school of Hellenistic philosophy. Born to the son of a merchant in Citium, Cyprus, he came to Athens and began to study under Cleanthes of Thebes, right? There's a Thebes in Egypt and there's a Thebes in Greece, right? The most famous cynic living in the time of in Greece. Zeno studied under several other philosophers, and at the age of 42 began the Stoic school, named for the Stoa Polike, right, which means painted porch, where he used to teach. None of Zeno's written works have survived except the fragments quoted in the works of latter followers and critics. His teachings were further developed by his second successor, Chrysippus. Important, we're going to talk about him. And the ideas of the Stoics had significant influence on the Greeks and Romans, early Christianity, and the revival of humanism during the Renaissance. Again, early Christians were Jews, right? Stoicism, a lot of the tenets align with what the Torah already teaches, right? This is it continues. Zeno was born the son of a merchant in 33 BCE in the town of Citium, a Greek colony in Cyprus. Citium had a large Phoenician population, and there's evidence that Zeno himself was a Phoenician by birth. Most of the information about him comes from Diogenes, Laertius, Lives of the Eminent Philosophers. Zeno became a merchant himself, and apparently at the age of 30 was shipwrecked while transporting purple dye of Phoenicia and Piraeus. In Athens, he was attracted to the works of some philosophers in a bookshop, and just as Cleanthes, the leading cynic philosopher of the time, was walking by, Zeno asked the shopkeeper where men like him could be found, and received the reply, "Follow that man." Zeno became a student of Cleanthes and later studied under several other philosophers, including Stilpon of Megara. It goes on to say other accounts disregard the story of the shipwreck and say that Zeno simply sold his cargo and remained in Athens to study philosophy, right? Either way, right? It goes on to say that one of Diogenes' anecdotes related how Zeno's sense of social propriety was challenged by Cleanthes, who asked him to carry a jar of lentil soup in public. When Cleanthes saw Zeno trying to hide the jar from view, he rapped it sharply with his cane and broke it, so that the lentil soup ran down Zeno's legs. As Zeno ran away in embarrassment, Cleanthes called after him, "Why run away, my little Phoenician?" Daggers, nothing terrible has befallen you. Several other anecdotes illustrates that Zeno exhibited the sarcasm and the penchant for shocking behavior common among the cynics, right? So now, Zeno was born in Cyprus, i.e. Citium, which Dan colonized, right? Dan colonized Cyprus, right? Here's a book called History of Cyprus. Let me pull this up. History of Cyprus, right? Right. Let me find where I'm at. Give me 1 second. Right. Boom. Watch this. So I'm just going to read from. So, all right. Let's just read it from the top. So it says, without concerning ourselves with the identification of Nusi, which had been explained as kenosis, or as miswriting and mistreating of Tarshish, We note the precise identification of Yadana with Yaman. It appears that there is no philological objection to the equation of Yaman with Javan or Yawan, right? Where we get Ionian. Both forms could not be used indifferently in the same dialect, but might correspond to each other in the different dialects. And Javan means Ionians. Out of all of this has been evolved the theory that the name of Danans, the Egyptian Dinian, is a component part of Yadanin, for which Yamani appears to be an equivalent. It is suggested that Yadana is the cuneiform rendering of the Isles of the Danans. Again, Dan remained in ships, right? I'm going to show you how a ton of scholars believe and identify the Danans, or the Dinian, which the Egyptians call them. It's the tribe of Dan, right? These are some of the sea peoples during what? The Bronze Age collapse, right? Let's continue. The word for isles is the same as the Hebrew Aya and the Egyptian Iwe, right? So Aya, right? Isle. It's the same word in the Greek, right? But so showing how Greek has its roots in Hebrew, right? Let's continue. But the Assyrians had no name for it. The Isles of the Dinian was probably the name by which both Syrians and Egyptians referred to Cyprus and other lands occupied by the Danans in the 12th and following centuries. But it is supposed that, not recognizing the word isles, the Assyrians took over the combination of the single word. Homeric scholars have recognized that in the Odyssey, the name Danoi has an archaic tinge and is used of the older heroes of the days of the Trojan War. This is going to be important as we move forward as well, right? Let's continue. This fits in accurately with the fact that they are active in the time of Ramses III. By the time of Sargon, they had disappeared, and the Greeks who had taken their place were known as Ionians, Yavan to the Hebrews. So Ashur-Haddon's scribe, having apparently some historical knowledge to prevent the misunderstanding, is thought to have put the current name Yaman in apposition with Yadana, right? So again, they were in Cyprus, right? So now let's move forward, right? Now here is the dagger. Here is a book that I have right here in my hand. It's called Who's Who in the Bible, Old Testament, in the Apocrypha, the New Testament, right? So this is page 426. Let's go here. Watch this. This is where Nick died. Right, like Drago says, if he dies, he dies. Listen, guys, get the bombs ready to drop in the chat. Bombs over Dagdad, right? So this is the entry for Stoicism, right? Which is on page 426. Now, this bust of this individual, this is not Zeno, right? This is a Stoic philosopher by the name of Seneca, right? So it says, Stoics, the Greco-Roman philosophers who together with the Epicureans questioned the teachings of Paul in Athens and brought him to speak publicly at the Areopagus during the second journey in the years 50 to 52. Tradition, but without evidence, claims that the Stoic philosopher and statesman Seneca conducted a long correspondence with the Apostle Paul. Stoicism was essentially the philosophy of the establishment, meaning the upper echelon of society, and was essentially it says, and upheld the official moral standards of the Roman Empire. In origin, Stoicism was a school of philosophy founded at Athens by the Jew Zeno, 335 to 263 BC, and had many famous Roman and Greek exponents. The Stoics believed in law and the law of nature and the law of conscious. God was the immanent, all-pervading energy by which the world was created and sustained. Nature is controlled and ordered by an indwelling and divine logos or reason. The essence of man is his mind and capacity to understand his reasonable order within the world. The good man is the wise man who accepts his fate, detaches himself from the world outside himself, and masters his own reactions to that world. Thus, in theory, and often in practice, the Stoic achieved a self-centered freedom, happiness, and self-sufficiency, but without pity, pardon, or feeling. For the Stoic, God was an impersonal energy, and sin was an error in judgment that could be corrected. It was not surprising, therefore, that Paul's teachings about God as the maker and Lord of the heaven and earth, who now calls all men everywhere to repent, who has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by someone already appointed by raising himself from the dead, was hardly likely to appeal to the Stoics. Such doctrines of a personal God demanding the personal obedience and personal judgment by a risen person were foreign to the thinking of the Stoic philosophers, right? And they, of course, are quoting Acts, the 17th chapter, right? But again, this source is letting us know that Zeno was a Jew. Rest in peace. Right? So the founder of the Stoics, Zeno of Citium, is generically called a Phoenician, and per the previous source is called a Jew. Let's look at some other Stoic philosophers. Chrysippus of Soli, who was born in Cilicia. Cilicia is where Paul was born. Tarsus is in Cilicia. He was born in 279 BCE. Is said to be a Phoenician of Phoenician origin, was the third head of the Stoic school, was the star pupil of Cleanthes, the second head of the Stoic school, and he died in Athens in 206 BCE, right? Now, this is from the Encyclopedia of Classical Philosophy. It's going into Chrysippus. He's from Cilicia. It goes on to say, presumably of Phoenician origin, right? So, and he moved to Athens. So again, this individual, more than likely a Jew, right? But let's continue. We've already proven that the term Phoenician was used to describe Israelites as well as Canaanites, as the Israelites lived amongst the Canaanites in Phoenicia all the way back to the time of David. Additionally, the tribes of Dan and Judah engaged in maritime trade with the Canaanites and mixed and mingled with them in various ways. But it goes even deeper. We will dive into the history of Cilicia, the same region the Apostle Paul was from. This is from Herodotus, right? This is from Herodotus' Histories 7.91, right? And I believe I have the link to this this website where you can find this. So it says the Cilicians furnished 100 ships, and these again had about their heads native helmets, and for shields they carried targets made of raw ox hide. They wore tunics of wool, and each man had 2 javelins and a sword. This last being made very like the Egyptian knives. These in old time were called Hypakians, and they got their latter name from Cilix, the son of Agenor, a Phoenician. The Pamphylians furnished 30 ships and were equipped in Hellenic arms. These Pamphylians are those who were dispersed from Troy together with Amphicochus and Chalcis. Now, Chalcis is important as well, right? I'm just trying to show you the history of these geographical locales, right? So this is the book, right? I have the PDF of it. It's called Phoenician Origin of Britons and Scots and Anglo-Saxons by L. Waddell, right? So it says, so intimately, indeed, were the Phoenicians identified with Cilicia. The latter classic Greek writers, when the exact relationship of Cilicia to the Phoenicians had become forgotten, still make the Cilicians to be the brothers of the Phoenicians. Phoenix and King Cadmus the Phoenician, this is on page 41, right? Going into page 42, are called the sons of Agenor, the first traditional king of the Phoenicians, and their brother was, that is the eponym of Cilicia, the Cilicia, right? Cilicia is just the anglicized way of saying Cilicia, right? There's no, that sound doesn't appear when you look at those Greek letters for Cilicia, Cilicia, right? Of the Greeks. And the ancient Phoenicians colonists from Cilicia proudly recorded their Cilician ancestry, like the author of our monument, and like the Apostle Paul, who boasted, saying, I am a Jew of Tarsus, a city of Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, meaning I'm a citizen of an important city, right? Let's continue. It says, they thus not infrequently recorded their Cilician ancestry on their sacred monuments and tombstones, in the foreign colonies, but also transplanted their cherished name Cilicia to some of their new colonies. Cilician colonists, like the author of our Newton inscription, were in the habit of not returning to their native land. Strabo tells us patriotically, they sometimes transplanted their homeland name of Cilicia to their new colonies. Thus, the name of their colonies on the Aegean seaboard, Aegean, right? The Aegean Sea, seaboards of the Troad, south of Troy. So there's a connection between these Phoenicians of Cilicia and Troy or Troad, right? Pay attention. It gets really, really good, guys. This now leads us to the further discovery of an early Phoenician Cilician seaport colony in South Britain at Cilicia, right? So this right here, these are just Phoenician inscriptions in Cilicia, right? In this area, right? This right here just shows, right, a Phoenician presence and influence in Cilicia and as early as the 8th century BCE, right? As we can see, Cilicia was founded by Phoenicians, right? Let's continue. Now, the last guy we talked about, Chrysippus, he was a star pupil of Cleanthes of Assos. So this guy was born in Assos, Troas, which is Troy, or the Troad, right? Troad, interchangeable, right? Which is in Asia Minor. He was born between 331 and 330 BCE. It's Troy, as I'm going to demonstrate, was founded by the descendants of Dardanus. And I'm going to demonstrate who Dardanus is in the Bible, right? He's the son of a guy named Phineas, which is a transliteration of Panya. He succeeded Zeno as the second head of the Stoic school. He is who Paul quotes in Acts 17. He died in Athens between 230 and 229 BCE, right? Guys, let's get these bombs ready. As we can see, Cilicia was founded by Phoenicians. Okay, no, I skipped, right? Boom, watch this. Let's look at the founding of Troas, right? So here in the same book, right, page 42, right, we see how we have that connection to Troad or South Troy, right? Sidebar, this source of colonies in southern Britain. This is where Dan and Judah were getting their tin, which is part of bronze making, right? This is from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. I'm subscribed to this channel on YouTube, right? I check out this channel all the time. They're always diving into amazing archaeological finds. Every year they do top 10 most fascinating finds of the year, right? And it's a really good source, right? I've been looking at this a lot because I had been working on a book that I was going to entitle "The Earth Helped the Woman," right? Which is a play on the book of Revelation. And the woman, of course, being Israel, and the earth being the heathen. The heathen helps substantiate our history and our claim to the Bible, right? So it says Israel's Bronze Age 10 from Britain, right? It says a recent study conclusively shows that 10 used for bronze production in Israel during the Bronze Age came from Cornwall, which is in Britain, substantiating what this book is talking about, right? It says, from where did ancient Israel source the tin it used to create bronze? Bronze consists of 90% copper and 10% tin, right? This is just a portion of this article. They have another article on this on the same topic as well, right? That I did not include. But anyway, it says many copper mines have been found in the area around Israel, such as Timnah and Fayon. And while the Middle East was not lacking in tin mines, they are of smaller local scale, not large enough to provide the amount of tin necessary to sustain the bronze consumption of the Mediterranean during the Bronze Age. Again, you need tin and copper to make bronze, right? So you got Dan going to Cyprus, which is Cyprus's name literally means copper, right? They're getting copper from there, right? And they got to get tin from places as well. It says the source of ancient Israel's tin has been debated for more than 2 centuries, but now a recent study led by Dr. Alon Williams from the Department of Archaeology at Durham University provides a conclusive answer. The study published in the Antiquity investigated 10 ingots discovered in the 14th to 13th century BCE, shipwrecks off the coast of Israel. It found that the tin was derived from mines in Cornwall and Devon in southwest Britain, one of the largest tin deposits in the world. Drop a bomb, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now let's continue. Who founded Troy/Troas, right? So here we have Genesis 38, right? Mayash, if you could read verse 27 through 30.
This is Genesis 38, verse 27. And it came to pass in the time of her travail, that behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound up his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first.
Uh-huh.
And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore, his name was called Pharez. Verse 30. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah.
So this is showing a fight between Judah's literal sons, his twins, right? These are Judah's sons through Tamar, right? Pharez and Zerah. And the line of the Messiah comes through Pharez, right? So we got Zerah and Pharez. So there's tension in the house of Judah, right? From the beginning, right? And when we look at prophecy, it says that the Most High God is going to raise up the tabernacles of David and close up the breaches thereof. Pharez's name, Paratazah, literally means breach, and it's the same word that's used in Amos chapter 9, right? First Chronicles chapter 2, verse 5. It says the sons of Pharez, Hezron and Hamul, and the sons of Zerah, Zimri and Ethan and Haman and Kalkol and Dara, 5 of them in all, right? So Darda is also Darda, right? So here we have in 1 Kings 4 and 29, it says, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is of the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan, the Ezrahite, and Haman, right? Which is Hayaman, right? Shout out to the brother Hayaman, right? That's how I gave him this name reading this, right? And Kalkol, right? That we just read about, right? Ethan, right? Boom, right? And Darda, the sons of Mahal, and his fame was in all nations round about, right? So we have Jews, right? Israelites boasting about the wisdom of of Solomon, and how his wisdom exceeded that of these Zerachites, right? One of which is called Darda, right? So this is a Judite. So we have Darda, right? In Greek, it's Darda, delta, alpha, rho, delta, alpha. Per Homer, Troy was founded by descendants of Dardanus. Dardanus literally is Darda with nos at the end. And they founded what? Dardania. Cleanthes of Assos was born in this place. If you look at this map, we see Dardania. Dardanus. Dardania is the region. The city is called Dardanus. The region is called Dardania, right? And the descendants of these individuals, which come from the tribe of Judah, founded Troy. Let's continue. But what about the nos at the end of Dardanus, right? So I asked ChatGPT, what does nos at the end of a male Greek name mean? Give me 1 second. Let me just pull this up. Give me 1 second, family. Bear with me. We are on page 121, right? Watch this. 121 of 182 slides, right? Just putting niggas to shame, right? So I asked, what does the nos at the end of the name of a male in the Greek of a Greek name mean? Now, mind you, right? When we look at Darda, right, it means pearl of knowledge. So it's talking about knowledge, wisdom. That's literally what Darda means, pearl of knowledge, right? So let's take a look, right? So it says the nos ending in the Greek names often relates to the ancient Greek word nous, meaning mind, intellect, or understanding, or the verb noemai, meaning to bring home, forming names that signify a connection to thoughts or safely bringing something or someone back, while os is a common masculine noun adjective ending in Greek, like Gregorios. The nos specifically points to a deeper etymological roots and core Greek concepts, often appearing in the names like Infinos, meaning he who brings safely home, right? So then I asked, well, what does nus at the end of a male Greek name mean? It says the us ending in the Greek name, often seen as ous in English transliterations like Themistocles of Pericles. It says comes from the ancient Greek masculine nominative singular endings, especially os, which indicates the subject from the noun and the adjective or adjective. But name like Milios or Linos have Latin influence or related different Greek forms. The nos itself means mind or intellect, right? Then it goes on to talk about how the most common masculine ending in Greek seeing in names like Gregorios, Demosthenes, S, and Pericles, S, right? So os, right? It goes on to say that when names are Latinized, adopted in Latin and then English, the Greek os often becomes us, hence Dardanus, right? So Gregorios becomes George, but older forms, specific names might relate to us, right? Then it goes on to say, in summary, the us in many male Greek names is a Latinized form of the common Greek masculine endings like os or s, right? So this is just a masculine, it's just denoting that this is a masculine name, right? At the end of the day, right? So if we move on, right? Darda in Hebrew means pearl of knowledge. Adding the nos ending either adds mind, intellect, or understanding to the sense, or just implies that it's a masculine name, as an ah ending would make it feminine in Greek, right? Pay attention. So now, we're on page 159. Watch this. Let me just pull this up on my browser. Give me a second. Watch this, family. I'm on page 159. Watch this, right? Page 160. Watch this. This is. All right, boom. Watch this. Page 159, right? I'm going to read from the second paragraph. It says, besides, it now becomes clear that Brutus was no Columbus in the discovery of Albion or Britain, nor did he require any such adventitious aid as a supernatural vision to inform him of the existence of Albion and its attractiveness for annexation. Albion was already at that period well known to the Phoenicians. We shall find as rich in tin producing country, and Cornwall was already occupied by a small colony of the rival relatives of Brutus. Before he arrived there, it thus appears that Brutus doubtless deliberately set sail with his fleet from the river Acheron for the express purpose of annexing and occupying Albion. The colony of 4 clans of fellow Trojans found by Brutus on the shores of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Let's continue. Outside of the Pillars of Hercules is of immense historical and ethnological importance in establishing the affinity of the Trojan descendants of Dardanus with the Phoenicians and kinship of Brutus with the Phoenicians. The settlement of these Trojans on this Tyrrhenian Sea was, of course, Gades, which was traditionally visited by Hercules and contained one of his most famous Phoenician temples. It was founded traditionally as a colony by the Phoenicians of Tyre. And we just read how Asher took over Tyre, how Dan was up in there, right? How Israelites were all up in Tyre, right? Which thus accounts for the name of its gulf, the Tyrrhenian Sea. There's literally a sea called Tyrrhenian Sea from Tyre, which Israelites who were seafaring, as well as other Canaanites, were in that area, right? And we just proved how 10 from Cornwall, southwestern Britain, was found in Israel, which was necessary for the creation of bronze during the Bronze Age. They were getting copper from Cyprus. Cyprus literally means copper. They were going all the way up to Britain, past the Straits of Gibraltar, right past Spain, making their way up to the North Sea to Britain and getting tin from there. These are Israelites. Troy was founded by these people, by Israelites. Let's continue. So the title also appeared in the Gulf of Tuscany, where there was similar Phoenician or Punic colony at Punicum, bordering Latium. Now, Latium is where you get the word Latin from. These are the Edomites that make their way up into Italy, right? And a province ruled by the Phoenician, Tyrrhene, right? Let's continue. Pure daggers, right? Page 160, right? It says, or Tyrrhenians, the Phoenician settlement at Gadis, or the house of the Gads, or Phoenicians, the house of the Gads,
yes, that's cool.
Was presumably found mainly as a halfway house to the tin mines in Cornwall, and so its offlying isles of the Cassiterides, now submerged by the sinking of the land. Herodotus records that the chief source of the supply of tin, which was essential for the manufacture of bronze for the ancient world, came from Cornwall. Cassiterides. He says the Cassiterides, from which our tin comes, is nevertheless certain that both our tin and our amber are brought from these extremely remote regions, the Cassiterides in the North Sea, in the western extremities of Europe. This tin trade and its distribution were entirely in the hands of the Phoenicians. And now seems that the tin land beyond the upper sea of the Amorites, subjected to Sargon I from 280 BC, was the Cassiterides of Cornwall, right? The Trojan traders whom Brutus found settled at Gad, were under the leadership of Duke Quirinius, bearing his this significantly Greco-Phoenician name, and a former associate in arms of Brutus. The 4 clans of these Trojans of Gadis are stated in our text to have been the descendants of banished Trojans who had accompanied Antenor, this Trojan hero. It will be remembered. Is described by Homer as the leading prince of Troy, who rode in the same chariot with King Priam, an ambassador at the parley with the Achaean Greek invaders. He was spared by the latter in their massacre of the Trojans on account of his honorable conduct and indignantly rejecting the proposal of the party of the Trojans to murder the Achaean ambassadors, Ulysses and Menelaus. Right, we got Jews named Menelaus, right, in history. Right, let's continue. And was thus allowed with the remnants of his family to escape along with Aeneas and his son Ascanius. He sailed to Italy with attendants like the Veneti, like Aeneas, but chose Illyria at the head of the Adriatic, and there founded Padua, adjoined Venice, which later a name seems to preserve his ethnic title of Fenis. Right? Then it goes on to the next page, 161. Watch this. Or Phoenician. He was so celebrated that he received a statue as a demigod from the Phoenicians at Tyre. And Tenor's descendants and their relations to Brutus are displayed in the following genealogical table, right? It says the 4 clans, therefore, of Gadis, of the descendants of the banished Trojans who accompanied the exile and Tenor, were presumably the descendants of the 4 sons, his son King Agenor the Phoenician, who was so famous a sailor that he was called the son of Poseidon or Neptune. These sons are seen in the table to be Cadmus or Cadmus, Phoenix, which we read about, Cilix, where we get Cilicia, and Thassos. The first 2 of which are usually called by ancient classic writers Phoenicians, as well as their father. And incidentally, it is seen that the famous King Minos of Crete was also a Phoenician. It seemed possible that Duke Quirinius though his Homeric title is Coronis or Canios, was a descendant of Antenor's eldest son, Kun, right? So, again, this is all this history demonstrating how we were all up. We were all up in this area, how it was Israelites that founded the region known as Troy, the Troad, Dardanus, Dardania. These are all Israelites, right? So watch this, right? This book right here is called The History, right? Let me find it right here. History of the Israelites and Judea, right? Philosophical and critical. And this is page 376. Watch this. Watch this. So I'm going to read from the second paragraph. It says, the intercourse between Judea and the island of Crete has been carefully disregarded by the commentators, and the historian can only discover faint vestiges from which the truth may be inferred. The first inhabitants of Crete, according to Diodorus Siculus, were Iade Dactyli, right? Who inhabited Mount Ida. Now you have this place called Mount Ida. There's one on Crete, and then there's a Mount Ida in the Troad region, right? Pay attention. And instituted sacred rites and sacrifices. The idea came from Phoenicia and were probably a colony of Israelites. The foreign mercenaries mentioned as being employed by David are called Crethim or Cretharines in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verses 7 and verse 23, and were distinctly told by Tacitus, right, that the Judeans derived their origin from the Idaei of Crete. This is evidently an etymological error of the Roman historian founded on the resemblance of the names Eudaeus and Eudaeans, but it is possible that Judean immigrants to Crete were in the habit of returning home, in which case the Greek culture of Crete might have imparted some of its features, and in the time of the Maccabees, to the Judean culture at Jerusalem. There is a slight analogy between Moses receiving the laws from Elohim Jehovah, right, from the Most High God Yahawah on Mount Sinai, and Minos obtaining the Cretan laws from Zeus on Mount Ida, which is Judah. There is also a resemblance, right, going to the next page, right, watch this, page 377, between Moses and the Muse of wisdom. Human sacrifices of children, which we know the Jews were doing all the time, the Bible talks about it, so frequent among the ancient Judeans, were also celebrated in the legends of Crete. The sacred number 7 was known in the Attic legends. Attic goes back to the region where Athens is, where an annual tribute of 7 boys and 7 girls was declared to have been exacted from the Athenians to be devoured by the Minotaur or man bull of Crete. A mountain torrent of Crete bore the name Dardanus or the Jordan. Come on, bro. These niggas don't know nothing. This is pure history, right?
Long before 70 AD. Yeah.
This is a book called Ilios, the City and Country of the Trojans, right? And this is by Dr. Henry Schliemann, right? It says, it deserves particular attention that the Taurisians' name is nowhere connected in Homer with Troy or its people. But as they had a city, Gergis, or Gergithus, or Gergetha in the Troad, we may perhaps connect the name with that of the Homeric Gargarus, as well as with the Gorgathion, who the Cebrion is mentioned by Homer as the natural son of Priam, who's Priam. Priam is the king of Troy that we read about in the Iliad, right? Ilios is where you get the word Iliad, right? Let's continue, right? It says the poet thus gives as Grote remarks a sort of epical recognition of both Gergis and Sebron. It must, however, be remarked that Teucer or Teuceros, the celebrated archer was, according to legend, the son of the Trojan princess Hesione, whom she bore to Telamon. According to a tradition, which we find in Strabo, the Taurisians immigrated from Crete into the Troad. An oracle had bidden them settle down in the place where they should be assailed by the earthborn. This is said to have happened near Hypaxatus, where an immense host of field mice came forth from the ground and gnawed away all the leather of their arms and utensils. There, consequently, they established themselves and called the range Ida after the mountain and the name in Crete. So again, you have a mountain in Crete called Ida, which is Judah, and then you have a mountain in Troy called Ida, which they named that one after the one in Crete, which means Judah. Strabo adds that this is the tradition had been first related by the Gallic poet Cleanthes about 660 BC. 660 BC. This is before the Babylonians taking us into captivity. And after him, many others, so example by Ovid. It appears from this legend that Taurisians were credited with having introduced into the Troad the worship of the Smithian Apollo, who celebrated temple at Chrysa near Hypaxatus. Now, it goes on to say, Strabo distinctly says that Chrysa was said to be the spot where the newly arrived Taurisians were attacked by the field mice. It says it may also be said that the Venetian scholars of the Iliad to have met a field mouse, both in the Cretan and in the Aeolian dialects. Others, however, deny the legend, maintaining that the Teucer, the primitive ancestors of the Taurosians, had emigrated from Attica, which is Athens. Either way, Crete, Athens, these are Jews all up in Greece as early as 660 BC. Right, let's continue. It may mention that the same Tekkari, believed to be identical with the Tarusians, figures the mural paintings of the Medinet Abu among the Confederate nations, which in the 13th centuries invaded Egypt during the reigns of Ramses III. So again, I talked about the sea peoples. These people, the Tekkari, are the same as these Tarusians, right? You have the Dania or the Dinian. That's the tribe of Dan, right? So you had Judah and Dan, right, who were seafaring, right, who were doing a bunch of trade. They're attacking the Egyptians, and a lot of scholars, they attest the Bronze Age collapse to these attacks by these sea peoples, right, guys? I didn't put this in this presentation, but I have a source from Egypt, right, from this inscription that I'm talking about, the Medinet Abu, where it's saying that some of these people didn't have foreskins, which means they were circumcised, which means they're Israelites. Let's continue. This is from the Histories of Tacitus, right? Page 390. This is from page 399. I don't know why I put 121 there, but anyway, it says the story goes that the Jews were fugitives from the island of Crete, who settled upon the extreme borders of Africa, and at the time when Saturn was forcibly driven from his kingdom by Jupiter, evidence is for this story is discovered in their name. The name of Ida, a tribe bordering the famous Mount Ida in Crete, having been lifted by a foreign corruption into the form Iudei, right? This is from Tacitus. Some say that the super abundant population of Egypt was discharged into the bordering countries in the reign of Isis under the leadership of Harusalomus and Judas. Harusalomus is Jerusalem. May assert that the Jews were an Ethiopian race, so they're saying that they're dark, driven out by fear or hatred to seek a new home in the reign of King Cephas. Now, King Cephas is a legendary Ethiopian king, right? And he's apparently, I believe he's the father of Andromeda, right? Or something like that. So we have sources stating that the descendants of Dardanus, who found Troy, were Phoenicians and are also connected with Cilicia and its founding. Dardanus comes from Darda of the tribe of Judah. The area in which Cleanthes is born was colonized and founded by pagan Jews. We also have sources saying that Jews inhabited Crete, the name and named the mountain range Ida, i.e. Judah. Some of those Jews then moved to Troas, where they name another mountain range the same name Ida, which means Judah. Furthermore, the father of Cleanthes has a seemingly Hellenized Hebrew name, right? Phinehas, right? Hezekias, Jeremias, right? You got Isaiah, Isaias, right? This Ias in Greek, it corresponds perfectly with Yah. So his name Phinehas is a seemingly Hellenized Hebrew name, which would be Panya, which means face of Yahawaah, which was very common amongst the Jews. This is the man that Paul literally quotes in Acts 17. Listen, ask any nigga from Genesis, right? Ask the brother Akaz who be cheerleading all damn day on Facebook. Ask that nigga what poet was Paul quoting. He won't be able to tell you, right? Let's continue. Unless he watched this. With all this information from various ancient sources, one could only conclude that Cleanthes was in fact a Jew, just like Stoic founder and brother Zeno. Again, I showed you a source that said that Zeno was a